All right, I was told to stand exactly where I had to squint the most, so I think this is about right. So yeah, hi. I'm not going to explain any of that stuff in my bio. But I will give a quick intro. I'm Tony Wright. In a past life, I was CEO of a venture-backed startup called Rescue Time. And I was in charge of everything sort of outward-facing, from design to marketing to PR and quite a bit of product. Across the rest of my career, I've built 4 companies, sold 3, kind of depending on how you define companies and how you define sold. So those might be semi-accurate numbers. At the bottom of all of my slides, I put my website address if you want a longer bio, my Twitter handle, and my email address. So if anyone wants to reach out during or after the conference, I would happily be helpful with just about anything that I can. So my talk is Marketing Smarter, Not Harder, Real-World Bootstrappers that won and the tactics that got them there. And before I sort of dive in too deep, I kind of want to define bootstrapper. It's not this sort of rags to riches concept. It's not necessarily extremely poor. It's about underfunded marketing efforts. And I should also preface this whole thing with having watched that last talk. This is a lot fluffier, so a lot less technical. So I hope that's OK. So it's about underfunded marketing efforts, which can be for a lot of reasons, right? It can be out of necessity. There just isn't money, or there just isn't margin enough to spend money on marketing. It can be because of a pointy-haired boss, right, who doesn't buy into the idea of spending a lot of money on marketing or spending money on sort of experimental marketing efforts. And for a lot of these sort of things that I'm talking about, it's about kind of new businesses, because I'm sort of connected to the startup world. I interact with a lot of young businesses. And they oftentimes are underfunded because they don't quite know what business they're in. They don't know quite how they're going to make money yet. And there isn't necessarily a marketing staff. There's a generalist who's sort of tasked with marketing and needs to figure it out. So these generalists need to sort of reframe the question, right? They need to, instead of taking the idea of, I have some money, I have some time, I'm going to try to turn that into attention and leads, they're trying to reframe the question into, how can I build a system so that I don't have to do marketing? Which is kind of an interesting concept. So a lot of these stories are about sort of non-marketers. And I would sort of probably classify myself as a non-marketer. So I have this sort of reframing the question anecdote, which I really, really love. I wonder if the British people actually recognize this. Does anyone know what this is a picture of? Anyone? I got one. British? No? OK. It's the Gossamer Condor. It's the first human-powered aircraft capable of sustained flight. And in 1959, there was a guy named Henry Creamer who offered a multi-million-dollar prize for the first human-powered aircraft to get over the English Channel. Multi-million dollars, 1959. We'd been running aircraft for many, many decades, right? This is something we should be able to figure out. So how long do you think it took an enterprising team to figure out how to get across the channel by human power? And the answer was a long time. Almost 2 decades it took. There's an inventor, Paul MacCready, who realized that human-powered flight isn't the real problem. He was watching these planes. People would come up with a theory. They'd build a plane. It would take 9 to 12 months. The plane would predictably, going back, do something about like that in a dramatic fashion, right? Heavier than air aircraft, failing to fly, generally pretty dramatic. And he realized that human-powered flight isn't the real problem. But the real problem is, how do you build a plane that can be rebuilt in hours rather than months or years? So he set out to do this. And he did it with mylar and plastic tubing and wire. And in less time than it took to build one of his sort of competitors' entrants, 6 months, he was able to cross the English Channel in his plane. So I think it's a really neat story about reframing the problem. And I sort of challenge marketers to sort of look at their task and try to reframe the problem and not try to do these sort of standard trading money and time for eyeballs and attention, right? So think like an inventor, right? There's Al Gore, famous American inventor. So it's not how can I trade money and time for marketing success, but how can I build a marketing system that makes marketing spending obsolete? And that's obviously a very tall order. I also want to throw out one disclaimer. Winners go home in the dark, I like to say. The title of the talk is obviously Work Smarter, Not Harder. There's lots of famous and very, very smart people that I respect a lot who talk about, working hard is overrated. This is Katerina Fake, founder of Flickr, who has a blog post called Working Hard is Overrated. DHH of 37 Signals, who has a Fire the Workaholics blog post. And of course, very, very famous, this is the most epic picture of Tim Ferriss ever, the 4-hour work week, right? And I like Tim, I picked a snazzy title, but to me, it's not about not working hard. It's about sort of maximizing what you get with the time that you invest. And that's honestly what Tim was saying in the book, too, although he catches a lot of flack. So the first company that I kind of want to talk about, epic kind of bootstrap marketeers, is Urban Spoon. And I want to run through, obviously, we got a lot of hardcore SEOs in the house, run through a couple of search engine results. Urban Spoon does really, really well in SEO, does very good against Yelp, right? And it's a very big sort of David and Goliath story. Here they are, #1 for Ballard, Seattle restaurants. You can see that they're hometown favorites, so that's kind of unfair. But Greenwich Village restaurants, also they're #1. And they do very, very well sort of toe-to-toe with Yelp. And if I were to ask you sort of before seeing this what you thought Urban Spoon's chances of sort of defeating a Yelp in an SEO war, you should say the odds are pretty slim, right? Yelp sort of came to the table with $56 million worth of funding. Urban Spoon came to the table with 0, a little bit of savings from the founders. Yelp had a team of 150 people. Urban Spoon had 3 dudes. Yelp had marketing experts, right? Specialists. They had SEO pros, they had PR pros, they did PR blitzes. Urban Spoon had a bunch of generalists, right? 2 programmers, 1 designer, no marketing or PR expertise whatsoever, and no real SEO expertise either. So how could an Urban Spoon actually compete with a Yelp, right? It doesn't seem like it should happen. And the answer is they did this really, really elegant system called the Spoonback. Has anyone heard of the Spoonback? No one? It's such an awesome system. I thought Rand talked about it all. Rand's heard of it. I know he talks about it all the time. So if you Google Spoonback, all you'll see is one sort of obscure blog post by them describing sort of how they stumbled onto the idea. And what they needed was kind of a passive system where they could sort of keep building links and keep building juice without having to invest time link building, right? Because they just didn't have the manpower to do it. In fact, the Urban Spoon guys were consulting on the side, right? So they weren't even working on Urban Spoon full time. So what they did is they figured, well, the people who talk most about food and about restaurants are food bloggers, and they're the people who we need the links from. And food bloggers want one thing, like just about any blogger wants one thing. They want love, right? They write because they want to be read. They want links, or they want traffic. They want comments. And this is a very sad food blogger. You can see by the drawing on his head. 5 visits, 7 page views. So he wants traffic, right? And Urban Spoon wants links. So Urban Spoon designed a system where that could sort of be made whole. So if a food blogger writes about a restaurant, this is Lark, a local restaurant here in Seattle, which is very good if you have time to go out to eat. They can put in a little Urban Spoon blob or a link to that sort of detail page. And Urban Spoon programmatically, if it's an approved blog, will automatically place that on the detail page itself. So here is a huge, huge, you can see on the left an enormous picture of their detail page. Zoomed in a little bit on the right, you see they have a blog post on Lark section. And this is extremely elegant because the bloggers can link to Urban Spoon with a little bit of information like maps and menus. That's very handy for the bloggers' readers. Urban Spoon gets an epic win because people are coming to Urban Spoon to look at information about restaurants, and blog posts are another sort of kind of information that they might be interested in. And of course, they get amazing, amazing links from perfectly targeted pages to their sort of deep detail pages on the site. So it's a really sort of elegant 4-sided win thing that is awesome and rare. So I know the Urban Spoon guys a little bit and asked them for some numbers, and they said I could talk about some in vague ways. So this is the first 12 months of Spoonback, and this is the number of blog posts, new blog posts per month. So you can see that number is trending upwards in kind of an erratic fashion. And hundreds of blog posts a month, that's a nice link building thing. And it wasn't without work. These guys were spending some of their sort of precious time out there doing blogger outreach, making people aware of the system. So it started slow, right? But it's the sort of thing where once it got folded into a blogger's MO, they would continue to do it for each subsequent post on a restaurant. So skipping forward to modern day, that squiggle we were just looking at, I'll go back to it, that squiggle there is the same squiggle on the lower left-hand corner of this particular graph here. So nowadays, they are getting thousands and thousands and thousands, and I'm not allowed to say how many thousands, but it's a good number, of deep link posts or deep links to detail pages on their site with zero outreach. And it's a beautiful thing that's sort of the gift that keeps on giving, in that if they don't do any outreach now whatsoever, the machine keeps going, right? They have a flywheel going, and it just keeps turning. It's beautiful. It's elegant. So you're probably thinking that, like, well, I don't run a restaurant directory, and there isn't this armada of bloggers out there available for me to do this with. So I want to move on to another sort of elegant system, a little bit less SEO-oriented, that worked really well, that I think is very sort of reproducible for other marketers. And that's around Dropbox. I assume everyone's familiar with Dropbox, right? Dropbox, it's a very magical tool. You have a magic folder on your hard drive. You can save files into it, and those files are available on other computers. You can share them with other people, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to flash back to 2008 with Dropbox. At that time, they had an epic launch product that people loved. It was out there, it was working, and it hasn't really changed in functionality much since then. They had about 100,000 users, which is a very, very healthy, happy number. And they had no real marketing team. This is like the sort of engineer-driven marketers that I talked about a little bit earlier. Their CEO is an engineer. They didn't really have a marketing team. So they needed to find a way to sort of do marketing without having to do marketing. They didn't want to do marketing. So they came up with this very elegant, beautiful, two-sided referral system. And the idea was that basically you invite your friends to Dropbox. If I invited you to Dropbox and you successfully sign up, I get an extra 500 megabytes of space. And that's the sort of currency that Dropbox trades in. They sell essentially space to you, right? The neat thing of this is that the other side is that you, as the person that I'm sort of giving this to, gets 250 extra megabytes that you wouldn't otherwise get if you signed up just through the website, right? So all of a sudden you have, instead of me asking you to do a favor for me, I'm doing a favor for you. I'm giving you basically special access to a service with a little bit of extra goodness. So to review real quick, give users a reward for sharing. Give the sharee an instant and unique reward. Now it's a gift rather than a favor. And that's it. And here's the result. In 15 months, they got through this system, trackable through this system. So this isn't all the users they got, but just through the system, they got 1.4 million users, 15 months. Ongoing every single month now, 35% of their signups are through this exact loop. They also get 20% of their signups through other viral features that are kind of similar to this, but a little bit different. And then, of course, there's old school, untrackable viral, word of mouth, right? So systems like that, and that's the sort of system that I think can be deployed for just about any product and service. Of course, there is the sort of notion that you need to have a product that you're proud to share with someone, which is sometimes harder than it looks. So I want to move away from geeky viral stuff and get a little more old school. On the left, you have Jack Mitchell, who's the CEO of Mitchell's. It's a clothing chain. On the right-hand side, you have Kevin Hale, who's the founder of Wufoo. Everyone know Wufoo? It's kind of like SurveyMonkey, but really, really slick for surveys, questionnaires, that kind of thing. It's a really, really awesome service. Interesting anecdote about their name. If there are any branding people in the house, they sat down trying to figure out a name, and they decided we like the Wu-Tang Clan and we like the Foo Fighters, and we were going to turn that into our business name. So that's a very, very impressive branding methodology. But it worked out rather well. They got bought by SurveyMonkey for $35 million just a little while back. So what do these two guys have in common besides a deep love and affection for the Wu-Tang Clan is they invest their time to thank their customers. And this is obviously very, very old school. They thank their customers by hand. Jack writes 5 notes a day. He's written 1,800 so far. Wufoo has Wufoo Fridays, where each team member writes 10 cards to their customers. And I'm going to try to read a card. I think I can read that. Hi, Clive. My name is Jen, and I'm with people behind Wufoo. I'd like to take the time to personally thank you for using our service. You've been with us for quite some time now, and we're honored and delighted to have earned such trust. It's people like you that help us achieve our dreams, and we'll never forget that. So on behalf of the entire Wufoo team, thank you. Warm regards, Jen. And you see on the envelope there, they have a fine dinosaur sticker. They've also apparently been known to put googly eyes on it. So it's kind of goofy, but it's something that people end up talking about, right? So if you look at actually Google search results and type in Wufoo, which is a fairly unique word, and handwritten card, you see 69,400 results there, which is obviously a very unscientific way to measure impact of that. but I think that indicates a pretty tremendous impact, right? There's also in the blog post where they announced that they were selling their business, there's a neat comment where someone said, everyone needs a hug, and you deserve some too. As a longtime happy customer, I wish you all the best, and may I never witness the downturn of the original Wufoo service. Besides the ease of creating and maintaining forms, it was and hopefully will remain the little things on the top, like handwritten sticker mailout, that made me suggest this service to everybody and his mom. Just keep real. So I think that's really cool, right? And you think about the amount of time invested, 10 thank you cards per person every Friday for Wufoo, and the actual impact, 69,000 mentions, is a pretty amazing return on investment there, right? And it also has other effects, right? Of course, you get the epic links for the effort, but you make your customers feel loved, which has sort of benefits beyond just plain old links and traffic. And you keep your team real, right? You're connected to your customers. It feels good on both sides. So it's kind of an interesting question to ask why you would talk about handwritten notes. I mean, I got one, and I talked about it. I tweeted about it. I think it'd be very hard to get something like this and not verbally say something, tweet, Facebook, do a blog post. So what's kind of interesting about that? And I think the answer is that it brings surprise and emotion to a very sort of predictable thing, right? A business relationship is predictable and generally on the cool side, on the emotional side of things, right? And it turns out these are 2 of 8 qualities that make for sort of sticky stories. Has anyone read Made to Stick? Everyone? Anyone? Love the book, one of my favorite books. These guys kind of did a deep analysis of what made stories stick. And a story can be just about anything, right? It can be an ad campaign, it can be a product, it can be a blog post, it can be an infographic. What makes those things carry versus die, right? Urban myths are a good example of sort of sticky stories. We're kind of in this weird world right now as marketers that we have this new wash of, and today I'm sure people have talked about them a lot, epic tools and epic data, right? You can do so many different things. You can analyze so many different things. You can slice your data. And I think it's very easy to get lost in that stuff and forget about these sort of, I think, the storytelling and strategic part of marketing, which is where I think a lot of the impact can happen. And so we can kind of fall into this idea of that where we're marketing mechanics, that all we're doing is kind of twiddling things and changing things and measuring things and optimizing things, but not investing all that time on the front end to figure out what story we're going to tell that's going to make all that sort of measurement and optimization so much easier. So I think we need to think like system engineers. We're going to build an engine. We're not just going to tune it. And we need to be sticky storytellers, right? We need to talk about things in ways that carry in sort of social ways. So I want to talk about these the 8 sort of qualities that the brothers Heath, who wrote the book, kind of identified that make things sticky. And one big one is obviously simplicity. Everything that carries has sort of a simple message. It's easy to sort of, at a bar, tell someone in 5 minutes like a really cool story. This was in my Twitter feed just the other day. I retweeted it without reading the article, which is what we do with Twitter. And the title is 1 in 5 American men don't work. Where's the outrage? Which is obviously, unemployment's a more complex issue than that. But if you actually had a title that was a little bit more descriptive, unemployment is really complicated. There's people collecting unemployment and people on disability, people in prison, people who've kind of dropped out, and that adds up to 19-point-something%. That doesn't quite have the ability to carry. It's not quite so sticky, right? But if someone says 1 in 5, that's something that sort of sticks in your brain. So simple. Unexpected is the big one in my mind. Like if you can surprise people, you almost always win. And there's this tremendously amazing study out of Israel in 1999 that's called the Fundamental Templates of Quality Ads. And basically what they did is they tried to dig into advertisements and find out if they could sort of classify them, find a template for them. And they found 6 major templates that all sort of were permutations and subtle permutations around unexpectedness. And then they ran 200 award-winning, very successful ads through these to see if they could identify them. And what they found is that it was 89% of these ads, of these award-winning ads, were classifiable under these 6 things. 11% still award-winning, but not classifiable, right? So now you'd look at that and you'd say, well, maybe these classifications were extremely vague, and then you can put anything under these classifications. So they thought of that too, and they did the same analysis on 200 sucky ads, right? They basically looked at a bunch of ads that were not award-winning. And this is what they saw. is that 98% of those crappy ads were not classifiable under these sort of 6 templates. And 2% of them were classifiable under these 6 templates, but still somehow managed to suck. And I think that is really, really interesting, right? Because if you think about storytelling, I think we look at it as this amazing creative exercise, this sort of bolt of lightning, this thing that can't be learned, can't be taught, can't be codified. And if you look at this study, it kind of indicates that it can, right? That if you play under these rules, under some of these 6 templates, if you're in the ad world, that you can make great ads a lot more of the time than if you are out of these templates, right? So it's not this sort of creative, wild exercise. It is learnable and it is teachable. Another big thing that the Brothers Heath talk about is concrete. That sticky ideas have sort of concrete aspects to them. And I grabbed a couple of infographics are a great example of this, where they put stats in there that are sort of very concrete that you can relate to. So I picked the 3 most popular infographics I could find on Dig. Apologies for one, you'll see in a sec. The first one, it would take 3 Frenchmen or 7 Germans or 14 Italians to equal the charitable donations of 1 American, which I think is a really interesting stat that'd be very, very hard to forget. The number 2 Dig infographic that I found was on poop. And it says 75% of your poop is water, and of the rest of it, a third of it is dead bacteria, which is a horrifying and very memorable statistic, right? Very concrete. And the other one is kind of cost of a new car, a Ford Fusion, sticker price $21,000, but the total cost of ownership over 5 years kind of broken out $41,000. So these sort of concrete numbers are things that human beings latch on to. So as you're sort of making these sticky stories, throw something concrete in there. Credibility. This is a hard one for marketers, right? Because marketers are trying to control our brains. And we're all sort of guilty of that. We do A/B testing. We're all trying to get people to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do if we didn't do our jobs, right? So, and hopefully in a benevolent way. But so what can we do to sort of increase credibility? You can do the just the facts, ma'am. Keep things, not subjective. Say what you do, say how you do it. I think the sort of big thing is to let other people do the talking. And of course, you can have a celebrity spokesmodel. If you had C. Everett Koop doing your medical company, then that would be obviously a very credible thing. But we can't afford that. So, but there are other credible spokespeople, right? You have third-party people who are writing about your service or product. They're saying good things, hopefully. You can lead with that. You can let your customers talk for you, right? If you have customers who are saying wonderful things, lead with testimonials. And there's a neat case study on that. There's a tool called Visual Website Optimizer. I don't know if people have heard of it. It's an A/B testing tool. And it allows you to do very simple, what would happen if I changed this color to blue from red? What would happen if I changed this headline from this to that? And test the sort of conversion on that. And they post case studies on their blog. The blog's terrific, and the tool is terrific. So this is a case study where a site called WikiJob decided we're going to put this little block, and you can see it on the right-hand side, of testimonials. They found that as soon as they put that block in, which you can see is low on the page and rather plain, they saw a 34% increase in sales, which is obviously fairly epic. My next sort of follow-on test for this, I would suggest maybe moving it up, maybe making it bold, a lot of arrows pointing to it, anything, because obviously that's pretty subtle right there. But yeah, so that's basically the customer sort of speaking for the product, right, rather than sort of pitching it yourself, which is a little less credible. Emotional, this is one of my favorite ones, and as an epic anecdote, I've said epic too many times this presentation. Texas had this huge problem with highway littering, right? So here are 2 signs that you might see to sort of stop littering, give a hoot, don't pollute, pitch in. These do not tug on the heartstrings, right? An owl is not a very emotional animal in a Robin Hood suit or whatever's going on there, or lederhosen. Pitch in, put trash in its place. Not super powerful, not super emotional. So Texas had this problem where they were literally spending $25 million a year on roadside cleanup for littering. And that number was increasing 15% year over year. So they were frantic trying to figure out how to get Texans to stop throwing crap out of their car. And what they did is basically came up with this thing that appealed to sort of the emotional side of Texans, right? Don't mess with Texas was what they came up with. They got Willie Nelson as spokesperson. They got a Dallas Cowboy, I forget which one, as a spokesperson. 29% drop in highway littering 1 year later, just from don't mess with Texas. Huge, huge win. Very, very emotional. So I think the emotional side of things is can be very, very powerful. And the last thing that the Brothers Heath sort of talked about was it's a story, right? We're actually telling a story with whether it's implied or explicit, there's a protagonist, there's a story arc, there's a climax. Humans love to tell and hear a good story. And there's a company, a young software company that I think is lean on marketing budget and has had some really awesome success on this front. And I'll tell 2 stories from them. One is that they basically went to a PayPal conference. These guys are attacking PayPal, a very, very small company to attack, right? They're trying to beat PayPal. So they went to a PayPal conference that was going on, and they froze several $100s of cash in a 600-pound block of ice with the headline, "PayPal freezes your accounts," which PayPal does and has a bit of a bad rap for, right? So they dropped this 600-pound block of ice in front of the conference and run away cackling, and of course get tremendous press from it. Everyone who's going into the conference is staring at this thing. There's all this hilarity as the conference sort of managers try to figure out how to get rid of a 600-pound block of ice other than waiting for the inevitable. So they got tremendous press for this. And you think about this, it's a hell of a team building exercise, putting this together. The guys had a blast doing it. And, epic, epic win in terms of the actual, the PR around it. And great links, right? So, I mean, this is a weekend of work for these guys. And fairly ingenious. I mean, try to figure out how to do that. Another thing is and I hate to sort of, towards the end, be a little bit more of a downer. But there's another story that WePay was involved with that I thought was really, really neat. Help save my mom. Basically, there's this young kid, and it's not this kid pictured here. This is I think the #1 result if you Google sad kid on Google Images. But his mom had stage 3 breast cancer and no health insurance whatsoever. And he needed to raise $50,000 to get her treatment, right? So he decided he was going to do this through WePay, which allows you to sort of accept donations for any particular cause. And WePay wanted to help, and they offered to help, and they said, we'll drum up some press for this, blah, blah, blah. And they said, no, we don't want press. We think that's kind of awkward. So WePay just kind of helped guide them through the process to do the best they could. And it was a really, really neat story where basically the results were, again, no press. In 2 weeks, they raised $50,000. Within these 2-week period, the second highest transaction day in the company's history. WePay got 4,000 new likes in 1 week. 55% of the money went through Facebook, 15% trackable through Twitter. And I think this is really telling about how we sort of react to stories, right? Because we all know how many orphans to be there are out in the world, right? How many parents are sort of, in this state, right, that we could help out. But because basically people were exposed to this story on Facebook, with a real person, with a real enemy, cancer, with a real protagonist, mom and this scrappy kid who's doing this sort of, doing this campaign by himself, scaring it up by himself. People responded and donated like crazy, right? Now there's obviously people in need all over the world, but we don't respond to that because we respond to individual stories. And if you look at infomercials, charity infomercials on television, you see similar things, right? They don't show you, stats on Africa. They show you one African child who needs food. And that causes people to respond a lot more. So the storytelling, the sort of story part of creating a good story, I think is really important. So I think, again, I'd just like to sort of finish that smarter and harder is important, right? We have marketing is real work. It takes time. It takes tools. Whatever energy you actually choose to spend on marketing for your cause, it's better to be swimming downstream. These systems and these stories can help everything you do, can make everything you do easier. So I kind of encourage people to not get lost in the data, invest your time and your brain cells and whatever tiny marketing budget you might have in marketing systems and sticky storytelling. And that's all I got.